Hey cousins, welcome to Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas.
Welcome, cousins, to this episode of Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas. I'm your host, Cornell Wright, the people's lobbyist. And you know something a little different about me today? I have on earphones. I still have my drink, but we have a special guest, Glenn Clark, coming with us today to talk about this momentous moment in our history. Join us. So, cousins, this is Glenn Clark. Glenn, congratulations. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas. And so I've introduced myself as the people's lobbyist, and so that's a self-proclaimed position. But if you would be good enough to introduce yourself a little bit so people know who you are and kind of the perspective you might be bringing to today's conversation.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Glenn Clark. I am a good friend of Cornell Wright. I mean, we go so far back, it's not even, you can't even count that far back. Went to high school together. Should that tell you something?
Ooh,
so I'm a practicing attorney here in Allentown, Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. Been doing that almost 40 years, almost 40 years. And before I was a lawyer, I was a journalist. I worked for the local newspaper here for about 6 years before I went to Seton Hall Law School. So that gives you a quick overview. Now practice now is basically litigation oriented, about 60% criminal defense, 40% just litigation issues, civil stuff, suing people, getting sued, not me personally, my clients. And that's what we've done. So have a pretty broad experience in practicing law, state and federal. I argued before the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. I mean, I've done some things. So I'm so happy to be here today as a guest for my great friend. We call him Big Nell.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And so on what we try to do here as the people's lobbyists is to educate, advocate, and just inform some of the people as to what is going on. And right now, I think there's a major piece of work, and thank you for joining us today, in order to talk about these documents and this whole discussion about what was occurred down in Florida. And so I see this as being a significant moment in our history, and I think all of us need to pay attention to this and not necessarily get caught up in, as what I've referred to in past shows, the gaslighting. But let's just kind of just take a look at it. If I will ask you for some of your expertise and perspective from a legal perspective, as well as, you have your own opinions as well, right? But isn't this like the first time ever that a president has taken documents out of the White House after he left the White House?
Well, I don't know if it's the first time ever, Cornell, but it's the first time ever he didn't give them back. He said they belong to me, not them, right? So if you take something you shouldn't take, you give it back.
Right.
End of story. So the thing about this being the first time, it's the first time for former President Trump. So other presidents, there's a decorum, things that you do that your predecessors did, and you follow their lead.
Right.
And he won't do that.
So isn't it reasonable to assume, though, that the president has an attorney or someone who would be able to not authorize, but to notify him as to what his legality is for documents and the handling of those documents?
Absolutely. There's some reporting that they gave him the advice. But when you become president of the United States, or before you become president, you say, I and I alone can solve the problems in this country.
Ooh, he did say that. So
well, whose advice is he taking? Not his lawyers.
That's a good point. Because I had another friend who was from a very good source, and he was discussing with me just very briefly how the story that's been provided, one of the many stories has been provided as to about this, is that his authorization of being able to change the classification of something at his will. And from my understanding from speaking with him, cousins, he was saying that once the entire process goes through, for the federal government identifying the various classifications of documents, it has to go back through a whole change of protocol and procedures and process, as we would hope they would do, right? To the authorizing agency in order to approve or disapprove the changing of the classification of that information. And so it's the same that someone changed it because they moved from one physical space to another. Does that make any sense to you is that a legal argument that one could reasonably make?
It's not a legal argument that I believe is going to hold water at the end of the day. The fact of the matter, you're absolutely right. That's a process, a procedure. But as you know from just watching his presidency, he doesn't believe in process, practice, and procedure. He
Mm.
just believes because I'm the president, I can do what I want to do when I want to do it, and that's that.
But practice and procedures, aren't those associated with being laws? And sometimes that, you know, we have those things made into laws because there were political reasons for it, or we were trying to prevent some harm in this case.
Well, there's some things, some practices and procedures that we follow that are not necessarily a law. So when you say a law, that
Hmm.
means that it's in Title 18, it's in the code, you know, and it's
Okay.
expressly written in the law. You know, there are a lot of procedures that we have at the Department of Justice that are not law.
Okay.
Okay. So if you recall, they were talking about impeachment. Can you charge the president while he's sitting and so forth?
Right. Right.
There's no law that says you can't. But
Oh,
it's the
okay.
Department of Justice memo that says you shouldn't do that.
You shouldn't do. Not you couldn't do that, but you
That you
should
couldn't,
not.
that you should
Okay.
not do it. And then they follow that. So
Hmm.
that isn't the law in the sense of it being in the codified,
Hmm.
passed by Congress.
Right.
It was implemented basically by the Department of Justice and whoever the Attorney General was at that time.
Uh-huh. Okay. So, but that would be kind of like a protocol or not to be embarrassed or something along those lines, as opposed to because no one had perhaps violated the law so egregiously, shall we say,
Mhm.
as perhaps been brought up and at least exposed as being potential legality as far as for former President Trump. And
That's right.
so as we look at these documents, just looking at that, um, taking documents that had confidential information, and regardless of what the nature is, we're still going to figure that out, I assume.
Mhm. Mhm.
But isn't that almost a violation of national security in doing that? You know,
Well, it
because
would,
you're taking it down to your house. It's like, you know, we're coming over to your house and people are going to visit.
well, I think there are a couple of different items, ways to look at it. First of all, I don't think that would be a breach of the law in and of itself,
Hmm.
unless the law was explicit and said you cannot take the documents out of the White House, you can't take them out of the Oval Office. If that were the law, which I don't believe that to be the law, then that would be a violation, just the mere taking of the document. But
Hmm.
what they're talking about here is a little bit different from that, in that he has a right, if he follows the procedures,
Right.
to declassify certain documents. But that's why you have National Security Advisor. That's why you got guys up at the Pentagon. You know, that's why you run it past them
Oh,
to get
okay.
feedback from them as to whether or not it should be declassified or not, or could it be detrimental to the interests of the United States of America. You
Uh-huh.
don't get to unilaterally decide that.
Right, right. And I could imagine that even a small folder of classified information could have literally months or weeks worth of analysis or evaluation to determine whether
Right.
something's declassified or not, right?
Well,
You know,
right.
because there's ongoing operations, there's technology being developed, there's all sorts of things that, you know, may be part of that.
And of course, you go back, and I don't know how much is true, how much isn't true, but you go back to when he was president. They say he wasn't even in those briefings, man. You know, so I don't know how he
Yeah,
gleaned what he should
yeah.
be taking home
Right, right,
because
right.
he wasn't too interested in reading the briefings and or cooperating with those who were giving him the information that he needed to have at his disposal to make good decisions.
Right.
So,
Well,
so
because as
he
I'm,
already
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, he already knew his good decision is if I make it, it's good.
Well, as I recall, going back when they were talking about that in the earlier days of his presidency, you know, the president receives a security briefing every day, from
Mhm.
what I understand.
Yeah.
And it was going through early on, in which instead of an every day, they moved to like every other day. And then
Mhm.
from every other day, they moved to sometimes. And then they would give the briefing to Vice President Pence
Yeah.
without President Trump knowing about it. And then from the reporting, and you know, you would be able to speak for as a reporter, they started to reduce the significance and the documentation. So whereas President Obama was famous for taking briefings home at night to read
Mhm.
them, and then so
Mhm.
he'd come back being prepared, with President Trump, they were making it thinner and thinner in regards to less information and making it less detailed, shall we say.
Right.
And so I make the analogy, just like watching a soap opera. If you don't watch it, but every other Monday, you miss a lot of the context and
That's right.
nuance
That's
as to
right.
what's going on a global basis.
Yeah, and of course, when President Obama was taking him home at night, he was just taking him upstairs, you know, in the
Right,
White
right,
House.
right, right. He wasn't
So
going to Mar-a-Lago.
he wasn't taking him out of the The White
Going to
House.
New York,
Going to New York or Chicago, wherever. That's not what they're doing.
wherever else President Trump went with them. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of different points to unwrap. Is one is whether it was appropriate for him to take them. Two is whether or not he should still maintain them. And then three is what we was use of and how you determine which were perhaps in a classified or unclassified category anyway. That he could make that call, which we've identified that he can't. You know, because
and I think he should have taken them without not getting clearance from the other department heads, but getting their consent and their advice as to what should come out or go out and what should not.
Because as I started thinking, I thought about this a lot over the days, is why take them, and then how much of our national security was at risk for having those things being taken.
Well, see, unfortunately now, excuse me for interrupting, but you can't tell that yet.
Right, and probably don't want to know.
Well, look, this is the way it goes. It gets they bring a search warrant, they can search your house.
Right.
And so usually I tell my clients, now you shut up. You shut up. Let me get the probable cause affidavit and the inventory and all those things. And if something's wrong, not done properly, then I'll file a motion to suppress it.
Okay.
Or not let the government use it.
Right.
So that's how you do that. So there's a process already in play for you to challenge whatever.
And but
the president wants to talk about it on the 6 o'clock news because he has a following who buys into whatever he says, true or not.
Oh, so when we hear about the FBI going in for this quote unquote raid, which we've heard about FBI's going at different points in time and to secure documents or to search warrant or whatever, that's really not a raid, is it? I mean, was that
not a raid at all?
Inflammatory knowledge? Because I also understood that, just let me say one other point, I'll let you go, is that the FBI notified the Secret Service detail that they were coming. Because if not, you could have had a gunfight between Secret Service agents and people coming in with guns if they didn't know, right?
Well, I don't know if you know it, but the Secret Service is with him all the time. He still has a detail, and he can't go anywhere by himself. So the Secret Service knows where he is at all times, right? They won't even let him drive himself unless he signs a waiver.
Oh, right.
The crazy little rules that the president and the former presidents have, that you just get certain things you can't do. But turning to the issue about the search warrant, that's routine, done every day. Thousands of people's homes are getting searched every day. It's not a raid. Now, let me tell you what a raid is. A raid is when they come to your house at 6 o'clock in the morning, they have the battering ram with them. They have the SWAT team or the emergency response team, whatever you want to call it in your community. They're already there, locked and loaded, because somebody has made a determination that there could be a firefight, there could be gunfire exchanged when we enter this premise, because either the person's got a history of violence or he's getting violent, he's getting involved in violent conduct. Nobody's saying that about the president. No, that's no raid. Raid is when they bust in your house and they shoot you at 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, that's a raid.
They feel like being early.
That's a raid.
They don't show up at 9 o'clock in khakis.
And tell you in advance they're coming, and
No. So. Okay. All right. Just from terminology and legal standpoint, as to how it would be reported in the newspaper, that was not a raid.
Team with you when they coming on a raid.
Okay. All right. I think it's important to be clear with our cousins as to what is a seizure, what is a search and seizure, and what's a raid. And this did not fall into the category of a raid.
Not by any stretch of the imagination is a raid.
And then while they're at your home searching and you have to leave, I understand, that's not an occupation either.
Well, you can stay there. You can stay there. You just can't stop them. You can't interfere with them. You could just sit there. You can sit there and watch if you want to. They won't make you leave. But you can't say nothing. You can't say, don't look in there.
Right.
That's not permitted.
Okay. Don't go into that drawer or whatever.
Yeah. Can't do that.
Okay. All right. So
if they open the safe, they can open the safe. They can open the safe, all your drawers, depending upon the extent of the thing. They can look in your car. They can do all those things if that's been authorized by the judge who authorizes it before they ever show up.
Right.
So if you don't have proper basis or probable cause to do it, the judge isn't going to sign it. Let me imagine this. You're the judge. You sign a search warrant for the former president, and you don't have probable cause. That's not a good thing.
No, yeah, right. You couldn't do
Nobody's
that.
doing that.
Right, because that would be exposed to too much negativism and things being wrong and not following procedures and all that sort of thing, right?
And get you sanctioned as the judge for not following the law. And you get slapped on your hands by the appellate court telling you don't do that again.
So there's a lot
not done in a vacuum. Yeah.
It's not done in a vacuum. There are a lot of processes in place in order to make this fair as possible to people. So it was not as though it was unfair, as was the indication to the former president.
Right.
They were looking for something to try to find something that's of, and we will find out eventually some point in time, something of significance. Wow. So here's another part that caused me some question and some of the cousins with it. As you were looking at this procedure, what they were going through, and now they're talking about the documents. And then I heard there's a category of documents that prior to, they were so important that you had to be in a room with specialized people watching over your shoulder for these documents. And these documents were also supposedly in the documents that are being taken away.
Right.
That doesn't sound good to me, because as I'm sitting
that
here,
goes back to what it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that's why you would talk to those people in those departments who have those confidential or secret documents about what should be moved. And if you're going to take them from point A to point B, how we're going to ensure the integrity, how do we ensure that they don't get lost? How do we ensure they don't get stolen? How do we ensure that they don't get misplaced? So there's a whole protocol that you need to follow to make sure that the chain of command as it relates to those documents is followed. And, with all due respect, former president, you just don't do stuff because you want to do it. You do it. And that's why when you start invoking former presidents, well, he took documents, oh yeah? Where the evidence of that at?
Right. Well, right. Where's the evidence of that?
Who said that?
Right. And I also believe that the Justice Department did request these documents earlier, right? And
correct. And some were given. So, and some were returned, I think, in May. Some of the documents were returned apparently in May. But then there's some other documents, apparently, they found out that he did not include in that group. And now they want them back too. And now it's a lot of speculation. Like, what is it? It's about nuclear weapons and all. I saw that in one of the reports. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
And none of us know.
We don't know, but then why weren't they, if there wasn't anything, why weren't they all returned when they're asked for back in the early time frame? What's the delay, and why didn't we
set up a process to review those documents, call those documents at that time.
Right.
And then maybe we wouldn't have this problem.
Well, see, because cousins, as we're thinking about this, the question I ask is that even if you said in May, okay, I gave all the documents,
right, and
then all of a sudden here in August we have additional documents, that meant that the documents weren't being handled very well or inventoried.
Right.
If you have any of your collections at home and someone said, give me all your collection, and then you give it to
them, all of them.
Oh, I want this part over here as additional collections. That's really not that secure, right?
Right. And you should have lodged your objection to turning over the other documents at that time.
Okay, so there's a legal process that you could take.
You can say, well, I don't agree with you. But then you try to work that out with the people, the National Archives and all that. You got to work that out with them if you can. But
so here we are, a nation of laws, and the protocols and laws here seem to have been ignored.
Well, they get ignored, and he's not the first president or the first person in power who ignores some laws, right? We wouldn't be that naive.
Not at all.
Right? Some things like that they shouldn't have done. Okay?
Exactly. But the point is, these are times and places in which we have to be very particular and careful about things, because the information today can be so much more volatile and have so much more impact than perhaps it had in the past.
Yeah, and the thing that scares me so much about it is that there's so much hypocrisy on behalf of some of the leaders in government who apparently I've forgotten the oath that they took to serve in the government and serve in Congress.
Come with it.
But, you know, they know better. These, you know, Cruz and those guys went to Harvard and Yale, man.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Their law degrees are legitimate.
Now, you don't have to agree. You don't have to agree with a particular position, but you can't take a crazy position that makes no sense, not backed up by the facts. See, you can, the law is not black and white. On the best of days, it's not.
Right.
But, you know, I have my argument, you have your argument, and somewhere in the middle, the judge will decide, or some hearing officer will decide what the true set of facts are under the law and make a determination of that. That's the way the system works. And if you don't agree with it, then you can take an appeal.
Okay. It kind of sounds as though there was act first here and then come back with some story and then come back with maybe the legal support behind that.
And try to justify that.
And try to justify
Factually, he's trying to justify it now because that plays to his followers, his supporters.
Well, see, excuse me. But Cousins, you know, I've said on this show before, in fact, I even did an episode on about lies, is that when you tell a lie, you have to sometimes tell another lie to try to make that lie work. And anytime a story starts to change, that means that somewhere along the line, there was a lie. And so I would submit to you, as you're hearing a different story every other day regarding the status of the documents, what it was, look into that a little deeper, Cousins, and ask yourself, where was the bottom line truth of this? And am I in fact hearing it? Okay, because on Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas, we're trying to bring you the truth as much as possible and as much as we know. Right. So again, you have any closing comments on this one before we head on out and let people go?
I think that we've covered the topic as much as we could in the time allotted. And I just, you know, the thing that really is scary is that we have to make sure that you check your sources for facts and information. And, you know, you can't go, some TV programs, I won't mention them here, I don't even watch them anymore.
Right.
And the reason I don't watch them is you're a bunch of talking heads. They're just talking theory, and they have no facts.
Or conspiracy.
Yeah. On the other side, they do that thing. Why? Why don't you just wait and let the court figure it out, and then we'll know what's what.
Right. And to your point, you had all these attorneys who are now elected officials who are weighing in on this whole discussion, even before when the FBI had just initiated the raid. They had theoretically, they don't know what the documents are. Let's go there.
Okay.
Theoretically, they don't know what the documents are. And they're just taking somebody else's word for it and going off these, I think, tangents in regards to what it might be when they don't even know. They haven't seen the documents or aren't participant, we assume. And if they do know, that's another whole storyline.
Correct. And worse yet, everybody who's got an iPhone, a computer, he's now an expert and a journalist.
We'll cover that on another show.
Right?
Absolutely. All right. So thank you very much for joining me. You have any closing comments right quick?
No, thank you very much for inviting me. My pleasure, always. Anytime I'm with you, buddy.
All right, then. We're going to try to get you back next week. I got another show for you. You might like it.
All right.
Talk about that subject of sources.
Just call me
thank you much. Appreciate it.
All right, man.
Appreciate it. Take care, cousin. So, want to thank Glenn for joining us, and Cousins, I want you hopefully to have enjoyed this show. Hope you had one with us, and we're trying to bring you, as always, the information you need to try to make the best decision you possible for yourself and for your family. And remember, we the people. Take care of yourself, Cousins, and we'll see you next time on Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas.
We are the people. We are the people.
Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas is intended for the participation of responsible adults of legal drinking age who wish to engage in substantive virtual discussions and social drinking for entertainment purposes only. Brown Liquor and Bad Ideas does not advocate the abuse of alcoholic beverages. Choosing to participate in any of the drinking activities shared in the program should be made with moderation and caution and is the sole responsibility of the user.